fuel system testing gauge. Turn the ignition key to the run position and note the pressure reading on the gauge. If the reading is lower than the specification called for in a Haynes manual, replace the pump. If the pressure is within specs, reconnect the fuel line and retest the fuel pressure between the fuel filter and the injectors. If the pressure is low at this point, replace the fuel filter.
The items you will need to replace an electric in-tank fuel pump include a brass punch, a hammer, a 3/8 drive socket set, a set of standard and metric wrenches, a set of jack stands, a floor jack, a pair of safety goggles, a siphon hose used to drain the gas tank, penetrating oil, and the correct fuel pump for your vehicle. We also recommend having a service manual, such as a Haynes manual. This will show you all the specific steps for your particular vehicle, along with giving helpful tips to make the job easier. Gasoline is extremely flammable, so extra precautions must be taken when working on any fuel system component. Do not smoke, allow open flames or bare light bulbs in or near the work area, and be sure of adequate ventilation where you're working. The first step whenever working on a fuel system of any injected vehicle is to relieve the residual pressure within the system. There are several different methods for doing this. On many vehicles, you can simply disconnect the wires leading to the fuel pump near the fuel tank, or remove the fuse for the electric fuel pump. Start the engine and allow it to run until it dies. This will remove residual pressure. Many Ford vehicles are equipped with an item called an inertia switch, which you can tap with the handle of a screwdriver to disarm the fuel pump. Once again, you must start the engine and allow it to run until it dies to relieve the pressure. Check a service manual, such as a Haynes, for the specific location of the inertia switch on your vehicle. Another method on many vehicles is to locate the fuel system pressure regulator, disconnect the vacuum hose leading to it, and in its place, connect a hand vacuum pump. Apply 25 inches of vacuum to the regulator, and it will relieve the system pressure through the return line to the gas tank. Certain other vehicles with BOSCH-type fuel injection will require you to remove the gas cap, disconnect the electrical connector from an injector nozzle, ground one terminal of the nozzle with a jumper lead, and with another jumper lead, run battery power to the other terminal of the injector nozzle. Touch the terminal several times to relieve system pressure. Do not, however, hold the positive lead onto the nozzle for more than 2 seconds at any time, as damage to the windings inside of the nozzle could result. After fuel system pressure has been relieved on your vehicle, disconnect the negative battery cable before working on the fuel system. For vehicles not shown, refer to a service manual, such as a Haynes, to find the proper procedure for relieving pressure. Raise the rear end of the vehicle and support it securely on jack stands. This will give you access to the fuel tank. For our demonstration, the vehicle will be on a hoist. Once the vehicle is secured on jack stands, remove as much of the gasoline from the tank as possible. This will make removal of the tank easier and safer. We suggest using a siphon as shown to help ease the removal of gasoline. Whenever working under a vehicle, always wear eye protection. Disconnect any accessible fuel lines and the fuel filler neck from the gas tank. Position a floor jack under the fuel tank and raise the jack until it is supporting the tank. A piece of wood between the jack and the tank will help protect the tank from damage. Disconnect both fuel tank retaining straps and pivot them down until they are hanging out of the way. Pre-soaking the bolts and nuts with penetrating oil will help ease the removal of these components. Lower the tank enough to disconnect the electrical connectors from the fuel gauge and fuel pump. Detach any fuel feed or return lines at this time also. Once all connectors have been removed, drop the tank and remove it from the vehicle. Remove any dirt that has accumulated around the fuel pump attaching flange. This will prevent it from entering the tank during the replacement. Using a brass punch, tap the locking ring counterclockwise until it is loose. Do not use a steel punch, as sparks may occur. Carefully pull the fuel pump and sending unit assembly from the tank. The fuel pump on your vehicle may be mounted differently than the one shown. For details, we recommend following the directions that come with the replacement pump. This will ensure the correct mounting during your installation. Always replace the fuel sock whenever a new fuel pump is being installed. Now position the fuel pump assembly into the tank. Install the locking ring and using the hammer and brass punch, tighten it securely. Reposition the gas tank underneath the vehicle and slightly raise it up into place using the floor jack. Reattach the fuel gauge and fuel pump electrical connections along with any fuel feed or return lines that were disconnected earlier. Raise the gas tank up into place under the vehicle and reattach the two retaining straps. Once the retaining straps are into place, remove the floor jack. Reconnect any other fuel lines and the fuel filler hose onto the gas tank. Remove the vehicle off the jack stands and add any gasoline that was removed earlier. Reinstall the fuel pump fuse if removed earlier. On Ford vehicles, reset the button on the inertia switch. On Bosch systems, replace the gas cap and reattach the fuel injector connection, along with reinstalling the air cleaner housing and any other components that were removed earlier. Reconnect the negative battery cable, and lastly, start the vehicle to ensure correct replacement and proper diagnosis of the problem.
Let's quickly recap the steps for replacing an electric in-tank fuel pump. First, relieve residual pressure from the fuel system. Then disconnect the negative battery cable. Raise the vehicle and support it with jack stands. Siphon as much of the gasoline out of the tank as possible. This will lighten the tank and make it much easier to remove. Make sure you are wearing eye protection when working underneath the vehicle. Disconnect any fuel lines, electrical connections, and the filler neck from the fuel tank. Support the fuel tank with a floor jack and a piece of wood. Remove the bolts on the retaining straps for the tank and carefully lower the tank from the vehicle. Be careful to stop the tank as it is coming down to disconnect any additional hoses or electrical connections. Clean excessive dirt from around the fuel pump attaching flange. With a brass punch, tap the locking ring counterclockwise and remove the pump and sending unit from the tank. Connect the new electric fuel pump and filter sock onto the sending unit and reinsert it into the tank. Secure it in place with the brass punch and locking ring. Begin raising the tank into position and reconnect any electrical connections or hoses along the way. Once all the way in place, reconnect the gas tank retaining straps. Add the gasoline that was removed earlier, reconnect the negative battery cable, and start the vehicle to ensure proper installation.
On some early 70s model vehicles equipped with an electric fuel pump, the oil pressure switch supplies power to the fuel pump when oil pressure is above 3 pounds per square inch. If the oil pressure drops below 3 psi, the switch will deactivate the fuel pump. Later model vehicles are equipped with in-tank electric fuel pumps and a fuel pump relay along with the oil pressure switch. The switch is used as a backup system to the fuel pump relay. The switch will have two circuits internally. One circuit operates the oil pressure indicator found on the instrument panel, and the second circuit is normally an open switch, which closes when the oil pressure reaches approximately 4 psi. If the fuel pump relay fails, the oil pressure switch will still close and operate the fuel pump, but not until it senses oil pressure. You may notice this type of situation as excessive cranking during initial startup. A no start or lack of fuel condition could be the result of an oil pressure switch that's faulty and a relay that's faulty simultaneously. A visible sign of oil pressure switch failure is an oil leak, usually near the top of the switch. To replace an oil pressure switch, you will need an oil pressure switch socket, a 3/8 drive socket set, and the correct oil pressure switch for your application. To prevent burns whenever working under the hood, always start repairs on a cool engine.